Today we're going to be talking about active shooter threats. We live in a world where this is, these kind of things are going on just with seemingly increasing frequency. Is okay. How do we increase that deterrence? How do we make your facility look like a place that someone does not want to mess with? All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Complacency Kills podcast. If you're just finding us for the first time, here we're with Kontek Industries. We do security and defense infrastructure, and basically what we do as a company is we stop bullets for the most part, vehicles, breaches, things of that nature. We protect security facilities and try to protect folks in general. Here on the podcast, we basically just talk about preparedness. Unfortunately, we live in a world today where there's threats of a lot of different natures that are out there, and we talk a little bit with different folks, subject matter experts, about how to be prepared for those threats, how to neutralize those, prevent them in the first place, but deal with them when they do come along. My name is Billy Barton. I'm the National Security Manager for the federal vertical here at Kontek. I've got with me Pete Peterson. Pete's working with us in the DOE space, nuclear facilities, things of that nature. And today we're going to be talking about active shooter threats in general. Unfortunately, it's something don't like to think about. Wish wasn't the case. Wish we didn't have to think about. We live in a world where this is these kind of things are going on just with seemingly increasing frequency, not only here stateside but around the world, and the various weapons as well. It's not always the kind of cliche media term is active shooter, but really we just have active killers, whether it's somebody mowing people down with a machine gun, whether it's somebody taking a van and running people over in the street like we saw in France. Different kinds of things, but just to talk a little bit today about kind of what these threats are, what we're seeing, what we're facing today, and different ways to hopefully prevent these things, with increasing effectiveness before they happen, but how to deal with them once they do happen as well. Yeah. So starting off with just kind of, again, things that we're seeing. I know you had some thoughts, Pete, on kind of defining, kind of what the threats are, what we're seeing, and kind of the trends that we're seeing out there today.
Yeah, I mean, the FBI actually, unfortunately, because of a lot of the active shooter stuff that we've seen across the United States in the last several years, and really in the last couple of decades, you want to reference Columbine obviously is one of the ones that comes to mind. It's an initial, and since then they've really done a good job of defining what an active shooter is, and you've got a rapid assault through a multitude of weapons or weapon that has the ability to basically, in a populated area, murder, maim, kill, and that's the intent. Someone is a threat that has a weapon system and comes into an area with the intent of harming, killing, or otherwise, hurting the public. And that requires an immediate response, and law enforcement over the last 20 years has done a very good job of coordinating efforts both at the local level, the state level, the federal level, along with support from a lot of legislation locally and all the way up to the United States government in kind of defining it, like I just kind of mentioned, and then coming up with basically mitigation. How do we stop this stuff? So a lot of target hardening and a lot of tactics, techniques, and procedures, I think, by law enforcement. And I know you mentioned, we were talking earlier, about deter, deny, defeat, and that kind of being one of the ideologies. You see a lot of folks doing active shooter training, a lot of, unfortunately, public schools, public facilities, really anywhere where, local population congregates in large areas. And I hate to say it, you can turn on the news just about once a week and see some unfortunate incident that's occurring. So being situationally aware, being prepared for that threat, knowing what actions you're going to take if you're in a civilian capacity or that as law enforcement, are critical today to the active shooter, both identifying it and then response, both as a civilian and law enforcement.
Yeah, I love it. I love that you brought up target hardening. There's a reason when we look at the trends from these kind of attacks that they're happening in what would be considered soft targets. By and large, we're seeing schools, we're seeing movie theaters, we're seeing. And schools are such a big one. Obviously, it's a lot of defenseless, kids in these kinds of schools. Yeah. No one's allowed to have weapons, that kind of thing. If you're just looking to go out there and do the most damage and meet the minimal amount of resistance, you're going to be looking for those kind of soft targets. Exactly. So one of the things we work with, our customers, as kind of our main course of business is, okay, how do we increase that deterrence? How do we make your facility look like a place that someone does not want to mess with, regardless, what kind of threat it is that you're facing? How do we harden that target? How do we make it very obvious. This is not a soft target. We're going to increase the level of difficulty. You're going to have to work really hard to get in here. You're going to have to work really hard to get to our people and to do them kind of harm. And if you do get in, there's going to be some violence being returned in your direction with some ferocity. This is not going to be a soft target, right? And so lots of different ways that you can do that. Simply from things like locking your doors, right? Like it starts super basic. It's not super sexy, but like that kind of stuff makes a big difference. We see, by and large, we look back a lot of these attacks. A lot of times there was, features of, hey, someone just walked in an unlocked door, and that's how it kind of started. And if we just simply had a locked door, that would have stopped things. Things like, okay, why, today, in schools, different kind of facilities like that, like one of the number one exterior materials we see is glass all the time. Yeah. And it's like, okay, we're kind of wrapping our building in a paper bag that just people can just get through and walk through. When for, $25 a square foot, you can put laminate film over that glass and prevent people from being able to get in. Sure, you can shoot holes in it, but you're not going to be able to get through that glass generally, or certainly it's going to increase a delay feature where, a response team's going to be able to get there. And so a lot of these simple steps we can put into place that increase, deter, make it look like a hard target, simply just deny folks from getting in unless they have the right tools and equipment. Obviously, if you have a determined force with enough gear, you can get through to about anything. But then also just that delay feature as well. How do we slow people down from getting in to where, just the cops and security forces can get there to respond?
Yeah, you bring up a couple good points. I'm taking notes here as I'm chit-chatting with you so I can remember some of this stuff. It's, the reality is you talk about target hardening, you're right. And tactics, techniques, and procedures, like I mentioned earlier, those things combined with identifying, we do threat analysis, we do target vulnerability analysis. We go to a facility here from Kontek Industries, we can take a look at that facility, and I understand it's a public school. You don't want your kids going into a, maximum security prison. Right. However, after the fact where there's an active shooter event, was there policy, processes, or ballistic I want to say blast. I mean, we're not there yet. There are countries that do have to deal with that, like Israel, and they have a lot of wealth and knowledge, and they talk a lot about, active shooter, and there's parallels. I wouldn't say they're the same thing. We're dealing with different issues than them. But the reality is this: they target harden and they identify and do threat analysis on their facilities, and they determine based on those results how much target hardening they're going to do. Does this require ballistic? Does this require blast? At a public school, there's some very simple procedures that they've already started doing, I think, based on federal law enforcement guidance, to kind of not allow for the average citizen to just walk into a school building, without, any type of filter or stop or procedure or process. And then if someone does get on site, they have badging and a variety of other, systematic administrative processes that allow you to identify whether that person belongs there or not. And that's, a part of it. Sure. I look at it, security is in these concentric circles. It starts right, you at the individual. Here I can defend myself. From there, I'm in this space. The three of us can defend this space. This space requires a door. That door can defend us. But you're right. It creates a delay. That delay allows us to react. If that person's banging on the door and I look out the window and I see they have a weapon system, I can go, okay, they are now a threat. I know that I need to change my response. It's not just, I should just open the door because they're banging. I know that I've now just identified a threat and we may need to respond differently to it. So I think a lot of stuff when you start talking about deterrence is, creating a hard target where people understand that this particular area is denied and only those that are authorized belong in this space, without and balancing that against, we live in a free society. We don't want our public schools to be, or other buildings, that are public spaces like grocery stores, they don't want to necessarily have a maximum security prison feel. Of course. We do live in a very monitored state. We have a ton of technology. So I think between observation and ballistic and blast protection, there's a good balance in target hardening, and you leverage that against, like I said, policy procedure. You can really mitigate a lot of the threat capability of an individual who might want to do harm to a person, a group of people, or a facility.
I think we got to shift our mindset to how we prepare for different kind of dangerous things. You look at, as an example, the fire code in our country today, and you think about, schools specifically. I think it's been like over 60 years since the last time a kid died in a fire in a school. Every single school has sprinklers. They have fire alarms. They've got fire extinguishers. They've got, they're built out of fire, retardant material. The fire code, accounts for over 50% of the cost in these kind of building projects. And it's something we haven't seen for just decades, right? But when you look at the threat of violence that unfortunately does exist in our schools and the amount of damage that's being done, why aren't we taking some of those same measures and some of those same steps and allocating some of that same budget to actually fighting some of the threats that do exist? And like you said, we don't need to turn every single facility into some kind of a fortress or a prison or anything like that. But there's very simple steps that we can take that really make a big difference on kind of that first step. Of course, once we generally talk about the 3 Ds for response and prevention, we already talked about kind of deterrence. We get to detection, right? And it's super important that if someone does get through that deterrence phase and they decide, okay, I am going to take action, that it's picked up on and it's reported as quickly as possible. We get the folks headed in that direction that can neutralize that threat. And so we start talking about. Obviously, this can be surveillance, whether it's electronic or whether it's active security forces, depending on, like you said, the analysis of the threat, and then alarm systems, integrated detection systems to pick up on threats as soon as they're happening, and being able to send folks to that site to be able to respond as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. Unfortunately, most of these events do not end in arrest. I don't know the exact stats. But I think from just a general perception and what the news reports, most times, obviously, if you're armed and you're harming people, it's going to probably end up in a fatality for whatever the threat is, right? That person, that criminal, that adversary, whoever. So, it's tough. You've got regular people and regular jobs working in regular facilities. How do they really, decide on and be situationally aware on what action they should take? You don't want to have an underreaction. You don't want to have an overreaction. How do we get that median response that allows us to kind of, educate, train, civilian folks and counterparts that work in these areas that could potentially be a threat area or an area that is attractive, like you said, a soft target. And schools are exactly that, hospitals, and a variety of other, local public utility facilities, anywhere where they know a lot of people. You see a lot of these, the post office, a warehouse, and sometimes it's a disgruntled employee. Sometimes it's a disgruntled human being. They're just, mad at the world. At the end of the day, we've got to be able to balance, that threat with the cost of what the capability to increase security is, and it also has to be balanced against the level of ability that those that are going to be identifying the threat and having to execute whatever actions are required. So, you've got to make sure you've got good policy, good people that are on board and understand, regardless of what your stance is on any of these things, to prevent fatalities, unnecessarily. There is a certain amount of action that's required, and security it's everybody, you don't have one system or one piece of ballistic equipment or blast equipment or one weapon or one law enforcement agency that can take it all on. I wish we had that answer. I wish there was a one-stop, hey, this will deter and defeat everything, and deny everyone. But the reality is, again, I go back to, we live in a free society, so there's a certain amount of inherent risk that we take on living with the liberties that we have. And I think being aware of it, being more situationally aware, and then, bringing folks like Kontek Industries in to do a threat vulnerability analysis, right, or a target analysis of your facility, whether you own an office space or you own your public school, or you are a facility like a courthouse, or we've done a variety of target hardening infrastructure for, I work prominently DOE and nuclear, so they have a known threat. We know that there's criminals and adversaries that may want to do harm to the United States at the strategic level. When we start talking about active shooter, you're talking about more criminal element, criminal activity, mentally unhealthy folks. There's so many different rabbit holes that we could kind of go down and talk, well, this is the way, this would stop it. The reality is, we have active shooters. They are a problem. So until the root cause gets dealt with, there needs to be mitigators in the interim to prevent the fatalities that we see occur when these events happen. And we know factually and statistically that response is a huge part of that. So delay, denial is big. And then obviously following that is law enforcement gets on scene. They have a rehearsed response to that threat, and they're able to engage. Now, that rehearsed response to that threat in active shooter, this is where Kontek comes in. We've got our mobile response shield. We've got our body shields, from Blue Ridge Armor. We've got our, that mobile, our mobile truck bed fighting position. And all these things, holistic, like, does law enforcement need this, or does law enforcement need that? Law enforcement doesn't want to need it after they need it, right? So in SOF, we have a thing, you can't create special operations after emergencies occur, right? It's one of the hallmarks of of special operations, and we live by that mantra and the fact that, we've got to train for the, the what if versus the, the knowns are easy. We can train to a standard and meet that threat, right?
Yep.
And that threshold. It's the unknown. So you don't want to have to respond or wish you had a capability. And with the things I just talked about, Kontek has a variety of tools, low cost that have significant impact on leveraging the fight against the threat and coming out on the defeat side versus, and minimizing civilian casualties as well, or mitigating them altogether.
Yeah, and a lot of these things are really designed around kind of, I think, of what we've seen as a massive shift in tactics in the law enforcement security side of the house over the past couple of decades, as we've seen an increase in these kind of, events unfortunately happening. 20, 30 years ago, I think standard SOP for most departments in this kind of event was, okay, wait for SWAT to show up, right?
Yeah.
And that's great. It's great we have those teams that have all the gear and have the training and are ready to just really bring the pain when that's what's called for.
Yeah.
But then we start realizing, like, hey, like standing around for half an hour while kids are getting shot in this school and waiting for SWAT to show up is not an option.
Yeah.
We have to get in there.
No, agreed.
And so what we've seen is, the need in the change in tactics and SOPs for individual officers, small teams of 2 or 3 patrol guys having to make entry on these kind of facilities and try to, find the threat and do work. And so what's super crucial there is we're not sending our guys in outgunned.
Yeah.
And by that, I don't just mean, yes, firearms are a thing and having the right kind of equipment, but more importantly, what kind of equipment can we put in place to really just put kind of a force differential there where they're protected and can respond with increased lethality, and those kind of tools you're talking about are exactly the kind of stuff that we've built. Yeah. Stuff like the MFP light that you can fit, in the trunk of a squad car or whatever. Have mobile, cover, ballistic rated cover and protection that you can bring with you. Stuff like the MRS, Mobile Response Shield, which is a great rolling shield, a team shield that can be staged in facilities like schools, like various high more high security locations that teams can get behind it and run and be moving down through hallways, moving through doors, and be completely protected, even from a lot of the more high power tools like your rifles with green tip ammo and things like that we're seeing being used in some of these events now. You got to have protection about that. Like you said, things like body armor, things like hand carried shields, lots of tools we can bring to bear for our guys that we're sending into harm's way to be protected, but also just be able to be a force multiplier and be able to take care of that much more quickly and with increased effectiveness. I think it's crucial.
They're lightweight, low-cost options that increase lethality and allow survivability. When you have a threat like that, it is no one is coming, it's up to us.
Right.
The reality of these situations is, historically speaking, it's been that first officer on scene that's the guy who's going to make the difference. Yep. He or her, whichever officer responds, or group of officers, they are it. When they get there on scene, I understand, like you said, they want to establish a cordon. They want to call in SWAT. And for certain scenarios, absolutely. Sure. And I'm not here to judge, any hindsight's 2020. We can look at a lot of different situations and go, well, we could have done this better. That's anything in life, The reality is planning for what we know, because now active shooter is a known threat, and saying, all right, here's our law enforcement capacity. Here's what we can give all of our officers. We can put a mobile response shield pre-staged at the headquarters where it can be picked up immediately and used by any officer that requires it. Right. If there is an active shooter event, this person is assigned to take it out to wherever that's at, whoever's on duty. Second, putting those hand carried shields in the back of vehicles and potentially having those available so that when that officer's going in, he's not just ballistically protected from his body armor, right? He's also got another way to get in there, get in the fight, and neutralize the threat, ultimately, because nobody, wants to see a delay. Now you've got an officer responds, like you said, he can't leverage the lethality that he needs to in the time that he needs to because he ends up getting wounded. Right. And that also lines up with training too, So we offer the ability, not only do we have this equipment, but, we support you being able to use it and utilize it so that you can build good SOPs, standard operating procedures, good tactics, techniques, and procedures, so that you can increase lethality, obviously increase survivability. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to save lives and we want to mitigate risk. Yep. If that facility is target hardened, if they have trained security officers or trained law enforcement in the area, if criminals know that, hey, if I go in here and I start becoming and making it known that I'm a threat, there will be an overwhelming response to neutralize me immediately. And so it really minimizes then, their ability to pick a target or your I say your target, but what I mean is your facility as a target, because you've created this environment of, like I talked about before, concentric circles with security. Your staff is trained, your facility is protected with target hardening, you have law enforcement that has the tools and training they need to respond to the threat. All of those things work together to create an overall security bubble that doesn't allow for these folks, to be a threat or be the active shooter.
Yeah, awesome. Like you said, there's so many rabbit holes we could jump down. It's so
tough.
much to unpack here, guys. But hopefully that's been just kind of a brief introduction into some of our mindset on some of the threats that we're seeing out here today and some of the ways to step in and mitigate them. Here at Kontek, we can do a few things for you guys. If you have a facility, if you have a location, if you have a department or a team that you want us to come in and help, there's a few things we can do. For your facilities, we do threat and vulnerability assessments. So we'll have our subject matter experts come in, take a look at your facility, and provide you a report of what we see as the vulnerabilities for that facility and things that we can fix. This is not just, hey, how can we plug in our Kontek products into your security plan? Yeah. There are things that we do not do, but we're still going to let you know about them. If you need things like electronic surveillance, which we have nothing to do with and don't deal with for the most part, we're still going to let you know. Like, hey, here's the recommendations for things that you need to plug into your security plan to really seal some holes. So we'll provide that to you. If you want us to help you implement some of that stuff and fix some of that stuff, we can do that. But that'll be a report that you can use to figure out, okay, what holes there we might need to fill in our security plan. We do have a lot of products we mentioned for target hardening, for force protection, that we can plug in a security plan as well and provide you guys to help not only harden your facility but also increase your internal resources or law enforcement's ability to respond to those threats as well. So if there's anything we can do for you, please feel free to reach out to Pete, reach out to myself, reach out to the company. You can find our information on the website, kontekindustries.com, and you can send us an email, info@kontekindustries.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and hope this has helped, guys. We'll see you on the next episode.